manual for bishops giving guidance on special services, such as the consecration of cathedrals. This one was created for the Bishop of Metz. I love the spectacular abstract backgrounds, especially this dazzling diamond lattice of gold and blue. It imbues you with a sense of the sacred. In the book's pages, the world seems to shimmer with spiritual energy, the artist's way of expressing the ineffable mysteries of the divine. As part of her research for the exhibition, Penny Price spent months reproducing a single leaf from the Metz Pontifical. She used exactly the same materials as the original artist. When it comes to creating something like this, it's a painting on a page. How many stages of process are involved there? I mean, this little array of things that you've got out here suggests that before you paint, you have to make your paint.
I do, yes. So that's your raw lapis lazuli, as from the mine. Yeah.
You're then going to, what, grind that up in a messel...
It's
messel and porter.
A pestle and mortar. or on a slab. And the result is this, which is the powdered lapis, which I'm not going to tip out because it's too precious. In the past it would have been more expensive than a book of gold.
But if we come to, as it were, the centrepiece, the star attraction of the whole production, the central picture, the miniature.
The miniature.
Presumably it's not just drawn out in freehand. Presumably there's some kind of design and transfer process.
Yes. I have here a piece of slunk vellum, which is calf skin. So it's from an unborn calf, and it's very, very thin. You can probably see my fingers through it. It's
something slightly like ghoulish skin about that, isn't
I know,
there?
Yes.
It's produced from a fetus.
Yes. I would place my uterine vellum or thin paper onto the image and trace it down, first of all, with a stylus.
It's almost like a form of print transfer processing, isn't it?
It is.
It's not far away. Oh, it's really very good, isn't it? I wonder what the occupational hazards of it were. A bit of lead poisoning.
A bit of lead poisoning, yes.
Presumably some very, very sore eyes.
Very sore eyes. I mean, sometimes you get a little colophon at the end of a piece of work saying, "Thank God I finised this piece of work."
Really?
That's
what it is. It's full of lovely little human touches, isn't it? I mean, I always wonder, what did they do if they made a mistake? After all that, what would they do?
If they made a mistake, there were several options. The more inventive scribe would actually sort of have a little ladder or a fishing line or something, and he'd be hauling up the correct word, or the word that was missing.
That's great. I love the idea of actually having the right letter sort of hovering on a crane as if to be winched into place.
Yeah,
but that sort of sense that they put the mistake actually in.
They did.
And they make a virtue or a joke out of it.
Yes.
As well as correcting their own mistakes, some scribes were prepared to amend the work of others. While producing a 4-volume edition of the Bible for Thomas Becket, the 12th century archbishop, Herbert of Bosham updated key passages of Scripture.
Now, Herbert was the most learned Hebrew scholar of the late 12th century. And when he embarked on this vast project, he decided to create more than just a glossed Bible for his master. He created a critical edition. He could not bring himself to correct the commentary written by his great master, Peter Lombard, Chancellor of the University of Paris in the 12th century. What Herbert did was he included images in the margins of the commentary, pointing with lances at the wrong passages and saying, "I didn't say that."
There's another such error in the Berry Bible, where Moses is depicted with horns. This was a common blunder, repeated right up to the Renaissance by no less a figure than Michelangelo, and it had its origins in a simple translation mistake.
It was a wrong translation of the Hebrew word, which, if I remember correctly, means that light was emanating. It was like a nimbus, like a halo around Moses' head. But the translation of the Hebrew word was wrong, and he appeared in the text in Latin as horned Moses. And of course artists picked up on that, and from there on Moses was always depicted with the horns.
By this stage it wasn't just monks and clerics making the occasional error, because illumination was becoming big business. The 12th century had seen the emergence of professional scribes and illuminators, a new class of artisans who were in it for the money as well as for the glory of God. At the same time, rich individuals had begun to commission books of their own, paying handsomely for the privilege. The more they spent, the finer the work, and the more precious gold leaf and lapis lazuli lavished upon it. Worldliness and spirituality were inextricably linked during the Middle Ages, and nowhere more so than in the status symbol come holy songbook that was the illuminated Psalter, the pages of which contained all 150 Old Testament psalms. For centuries, this book, the Macclesfield Psalter, lay forgotten in the library at Sherborne Castle. It narrowly avoided being sold to an American museum after a campaign raised sufficient public and private donations to find a new home for it here at the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge. Often the experience of looking at books in exhibitions is deeply frustrating because you want to get into the case and open them. But because the Macclesfield Psalter, which is probably the single most important illuminated manuscript to have been discovered in recent memory, because it's been unbound for restoration, you can follow it page by page. It opens a window on, so to speak, the unofficial aspect of the medieval imagination. Yes, you get the official illustration of the scenes from the Bible, but what you also get are all these wonderful marginalia where the artist has just let his fantasy flow freely.
Why medieval books have marginalia which are funny and rude and satirical is a burning question, because to our eyes, in a sense, we have a rather solemn view of religion as something sort of slightly sanitized, but clearly in the Middle Ages, the whole question of different categories applying, different boundaries, or lack of boundaries applying, I think is very relevant. I mean, when you see a bunny playing an organ very happily, and there's a dog pumping the organ at the back, and the dog looks really fed up. Why was this found funny? There's a lot about rabbits and animals in these books, and that's because people used animals as metaphors for human situations.
What a dear little book the Macclesfield Psalter is. It's a mad little book. The person who's illuminating that seems to be on his mobile phone to Hieronymus Bosch the whole time. I've never seen grotesques like that. And you know that some of them have got the face of the tax collector, only it's on somebody's bottom. That's just great.
There's a man having a fight with a snail. But I mean, you can look for a meaning to why a man is having a fight with a snail. But if the whole control of scale is in your hands, you hardly need a meaning. It's something that you can do it, and if you're freewheeling down in the corner where no one is particularly going to see you, there's no reason why you shouldn't do it, I think.
When we're trying to come to terms with what the Middle Ages were like, there seems to have been some way that people could encompass immense devotion with an inversion of that devotion, so that you could parody it, mock it, turn monks into monkeys. You could show fornication, defecation, you could show the whole gamut of bodily functions all round the edges of what was an incredible act of devotion and piety.
By the late Middle Ages, psalters were very popular. No affluent home would be complete without one. But the most treasured possession in any household was the Book of Hours, a compendium of texts honouring the Virgin Mary. Most were owned by women, who would read them in private at set times during the day. They tended to be small, but they were the most richly jewelled and colourful books a family could possess.
For most people, it was the only book they ever owned. For many of our ancestors, the only book they'd ever seen. It was the book from which children would learn to read in the Middle Ages, and you sometimes get the alphabet written out in a Book of Hours, and the child would learn from it. It was probably the most widely circulated book of the Middle Ages, and often the most richly illustrated.
So we see a Book of Hours functioning as the private gallery, the private prayer book, the symbol of the artistic